detecting material misstatements resulting from fraud is higher than for one resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. Circumstances, but not for the purposes of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the fund's internal control. Evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimates and related disclosures made by the directors. Conclude the appropriateness of the director's use of the going concern basis of accounting, and based on the audit evidence obtained, whether a material uncertainty exists related to the event or conditions that may cast significant doubt on the fund's ability to continue as a going concern. If I conclude that a material uncertainty exists, I am required to draw attention in my auditor's report to the related disclosures in the financial statements, or if such disclosure are inadequate, to modify my opinion. My conclusions are based on the audit evidence obtained up to the date of the auditor's report. However, future events or conditions may cause the fund to cease to continue as a going concern. Evaluate the overall presentation structure and content of the financial statements, including the disclosures, and whether the financial statements represent the underlying transactions and events in a manner that achieves fair presentation. I communicate with the directors regarding other matters, the planned scope and timing of the audit, and significant audit findings, including any significant deficiencies in internal control that I identify during my audit. Signed, John F.S. Mwanga, Auditor General, 24th of September, 2019. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the Auditor General. Another round of applause, please, for the Auditor General. Thank you. There's been a number which has caused a lot of reactions from the working community. I must add that I'm also a stakeholder in NSSF because I keep my money with the fund. The 402 billion reduction somewhere. And I'm sure the MD is going to talk about it in his presentation. On top of that, of course, there's an aspect of interest. Because as workers, one of the things we look for with the fund is what are we getting as return on investment on the saving that we make with the fund. But I need to add that the positive numbers that I mentioned earlier came on the back of a fairly challenging macroeconomic environment. Of course, we know that if you look at the fund's mix, about 70% is in fixed income, which is government securities, bonds and treasury bills. And there was a bit of a challenge on the 15-year bond, a reduction there. If you look at the equity markets across the region, because the current law limits the fund from investing beyond East Africa. From Tanzania, the Dar Stock Exchange, Nairobi, to Uganda, there have been issues of volumes there reducing. And the second biggest asset class of the fund is within the equities or the stocks in these traded companies. And then, of course, you have real estate coming in last. But the MD will give us a bit more explanations about what really happened and what guarantees are there for us workers, to ensure that our backs are covered. Because NSSF is our fallback arrangement when everything else ceases. So at this moment, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming the Managing Director, National Social Security Fund, Mr. Richard Byarugaba.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had breakfast. Surely, got some energy left. So protocol, my board chair, the auditor general, my regulator, colleagues, board members, colleagues in management, our members, ladies and gentlemen, maybe the media as well, and those who are following us online. So today is our ritual where we come to you every single year for the last 7 years to talk a little bit about the performance of the fund and to deal with what effectively is the story about your money for the last 12 months since we last reported. I believe at the last time we did that at the Pearl of Africa Hotel. So I got a short presentation that about our business model. Nothing much has changed. So if you want to switch off, you may. We'll talk about the environment in which we operated in. That was tough, as Charles just alluded to. Out of the environment, I'll talk about how we performed. And then you will allow me to, within a slide or two, talk a little bit about the future. The future that we believe is very optimistic and bright. So let's talk a little bit about our business model. We continue to collect money from our members. We still request them to pay in 15%, 5% from the employee, 10% from the employer. We invest that in 3 asset classes. It's an inverted triangle, which basically shows that we put the least amount of money in alternate assets. In our case, it's real estate. Our current exposure to real estate is only 6%. We've put 14% in equities and almost 80%, I know Charles said 70, but it's almost 80% in fixed income. Now, if you were a keen observer of those numbers, you'll have noticed that last year, the numbers were slightly higher in equity, almost 20%, and our fixed income portfolio was slightly lower than the number you're seeing today. The result of the revaluation that I will talk about later on is largely to drive for that, because we didn't reduce our exposure per se. It's only that as a result of the valuations going down in our equity portfolio, the numbers went down. Our desired level is 5% in real estate, 25% in equities, and about 70% in fixed income. What does that mean? It means that we have an overexposure in fixed income of almost 9%. We have an underexposure in equities, almost 11% or 11%, and just about right on the real estate. Once we get the money out of our investments, we use part of them for our overheads. Our current expenses ratio is about 1.28% of assets under management. So how do you get that number? You get your expenses and you divide through by the assets that we are managing. I think Charles mentioned it, about 11.3 trillion shillings. You then get the figure of 1.28%. The rest of the money that we obtain, we pay our members interest, and reach that senior stage in their offices where they've had a big salary and they've had big contributions. And therefore, when they withdraw from the fund, they've got quite significant balances driving up those numbers. So, we then have a governance ring around our model, which enables us to provide the business and also make sure that there is the right governance structure that drives the fund. So that's our business model, has remained largely unchanged, but as I will talk about a little bit about the future, that we might need to review going forward. So let's talk about the environment which we operated under during the 12 months. And I'll start off by looking at economic growth. That graph represents the picture in Uganda, which shows that there was a little bit of uptake on the growth figures, slightly flat, but definitely from 2 years ago, it was a very low base. If you look at the regional markets where we operate, you'll notice that they've had a slightly consistent growth in the region of 5% for Kenya and 7% for Tanzania. But if you've been following things, the IMF has been disputing some of the Tanzanian figures, so we won't debate that. But anyway, they've been around 7% per annum. So you'll notice that if you look at the three markets in which we operate, the Rwanda numbers are not there, but they've been around the same sort of growth numbers. You'll notice that all these economies have registered good growths, because if you look at the world market, the growth rates are less than 2%. So for economies in our region of about 6%, that is tremendous growth, and therefore very positive for us as a fund, which is why you'll notice that our contributions have been growing. But before I come to the contribution growth, I'd like to talk a little bit about inflation. The three countries where we operate, inflation has been coming down. The lowest at the moment is in Uganda at about 3.1%. In Kenya, it's remained around the 5%, 6% mark. And in Tanzania, it's around the 4% mark, or 3.7 mark, coming off. So this has been largely driven by an accommodative monetary policy, which basically means that there has been a lot of that is driven also by the fact that agriculture has been good. So many of the countries, you'll see that they had good rains. So the price, the food price tends to become a big part of the CPI. And you'll see that as a result of that, you will notice that inflation has been coming down in many of these markets in which we have been operating. If you come back to Uganda, because of the drop in in inflation rate, you'll notice that our 10-year average has also come down from about 7.16% to 6.28%, which is a good thing because inflation is coming down, and therefore our hurdle that we've promised to pay you over means that our job becomes a little bit easier because we basically can exceed that big hurdle of the loss in value of your funds. So the next area I'd like to look at is the fiscal and monetary side, which basically drives the interest rates. You'll also notice that the CBR rate has been coming down. It did go down to 9% last year, but was lifted up slightly this year to about 10%. But the concern for us has been around the bond rates. The 15-year bond did come down on average from 14.1 to 14. And that message is sort of driving through on the monetary side or on the interest rate side. Sorry, the numbers for the 15-year bond are there, 17.75 to 15.85. But that's, almost 300 basis points drop, which is quite large if you look at the fact that 70% or 80% of our portfolio is in bonds, which means that a drop means that the returns we get, that we pay you as members, does go down significantly. So the overall result, however, in the monetary side is that there has been an increase in private sector borrowing, which is good for the economy. So you'll notice that many of the sectors borrowed more. Specifically, you'll notice that in the manufacturing sector, the growth rate in private sector in the manufacturing side was 14%, which would mean that people are borrowing to increase their factories and increase production. The other areas of growth has also been in the business services area, which grew at about 19%. So overall, the drop in interest rates means that companies are able to borrow more and therefore make more contributions. And this is where we see our numbers going up on the contribution side. The next area I'd like to look at is on the exchange rate. You all are aware that the Uganda shilling strengthened, and I said this at the press conference we had last week, that for the first time in a very long time, I was actually looking at the trends. I think this last happened in the 90s, 94, 95, when we had a strengthening of Uganda shilling against the other currencies. But for the very first time, we've seen a gradual strengthening of the Ugandan shillings against major currencies, but specifically Kenya shillings, because that's where we have much of our investments outside of Uganda. Specifically in the equity, about 60% of our equity is held in the Kenyan market. So a drop in the currency means that we have a smaller balance on our balance sheet. Now, I know that we've had a lot of discussion. Yes, we've had a lot of discussion when we last announced that we were going to declare a lower rate than we did last year. And the reason is because we made a loss. And there's been so much debate about the loss. So I thought I would explain a little bit about that loss through this very, very good example I have been able to prepare before I go. On the stock exchange, you will notice that there's been very many reds on there. The Dar es Salaam Stock Exchange was the biggest loser. Its index lost about 21%. The next loser was the Nairobi Stock Exchange, where we lost about 14% of its, where the stock exchange lost about 14% of its value. And the Ugandan exchange was about 10%, with the Rwanda coming list at about 3%. So generally all stock markets went down, largely driven by externalities. So what were the externalities? We saw a lot of the institutional investors who are big players in the market withdrawing from the 3 or 4 markets. So when they withdraw from the market, it means that there is a higher supply of stocks that they are trying to sell. And if you got higher supply without demand, because most of the demand is provided by these institutional investors, the result is that the price of these stocks come down. So the reason why the stock markets lost their values was not because the companies that are listed were performing badly, but because of externalities, and that's largely to do with the institutional investors who are based outside of Africa, who bring their investments here. And you can find all the reasons that they decided to go back to their markets. Much of them were to do with interest rate situation that's happening in the US, Brexit that's happening in Europe and the UK, and some of the other measures that the central banks were doing in there, trying to put more liquidity back into their markets in order to stimulate growth. So those, as I say, were the reasons why the stock markets went down, not because the companies on these stocks were doing badly. In fact, you will see in the numbers that the companies in which we invested in actually gave us more dividends. The number is about 20 billion extra in dividends that we got from the previous year. I've just shown you something that I'd like you to pay attention to. It doesn't come out as quite large, maybe on the presentation, but that's quite important to note. So the number of that I showed you of the drop in the indices is the overall market within the Kenyan, Tanzanian, Ugandan, and Rwandese market, okay? So that is the index that tracks all the shares. However, the little box that I have put at the side of this presentation shows our own performance. So if you look at the index in Uganda, the index lost by 9.5%. However, our own portfolio from the Ugandan perspective, with the stocks that we hold at NSSF on our portfolio, only lost 5.3%. So in other words, we overperformed the index. If you look at the Kenyan index, our stocks that we have in there went down by 15%, not by 19%, which is what the index lost. If you look at the Rwandese, the DA stock exchange, sorry, there's a typo there. The second last one is a DA. The index went down by about 26%. We lost on our portfolio about 24%, and then on the Rwandese stock exchange, lost about 11%, and we lost slightly more than the index did. So just to show you that our own investment managers outperformed the index. So we could actually have had a bigger loss, and that's the message I'd like to sort of explain and put forward to you. So let's look at this little example that I alluded to earlier on. And this is for the people who really want to look at the numbers. We've used a hypothetical investor who has invested in Safaricom as an example because it's one of our largest stocks. So supposing that hypothetical investor had invested in 100 shares during 2017, their price in Kenya shillings would have been 29.5, and the exchange rate at the time was 38.45 shillings, Uganda shillings, to the Kenya shillings. So the value in their balance sheet, right, if they were holding a balance sheet, their value or their wealth would have been 113,428 shillings. Okay? So that is what would have happened in 2017-18. What happened during this particular year? The shares for Safaricom dropped to 28.1 shillings, Kenya shillings. The exchange rate strengthened. In other words, Uganda shillings strengthened, therefore we needed fewer shillings to buy Kenya shillings, to 36.1. And therefore the value, your value of investment of 100 shares in Safaricom, this particular year would have been worth 101,000 shillings, 441. So if you were to book this loss in your books, you would have lost about 11,987. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, because you still hold the Safaricom shares, the 11,987 is a book loss. It is something you've got to book because you're being prudent, because that's what the accountants tell you to do, because that's what the financial analysts tell you to do, that you've got to recognize the losses in your books and book them, and you've got to recognize the gains and also book them. So that's basically the story of the equities and the exchange rate during the particular year. Specifically coming to NSSF, I have given you a 3-year period and exactly on the Safaricom. So this is our investment. We've got about 274,500,000 shares. In the year ending June 2016, the price of the share of Safaricom was 17.75, and the exchange rate at the time, Uganda shilling to Kenya shilling, was 33.06. Okay, so the following year you can see the movement and so on and so forth. So let's look at what happened during the year. you'll notice that in the year ending 30th June 2018, there was an upward movement in the share price. So it went up from 22.75 shillings to 29.5 shillings. During the same year, Uganda shilling depreciated. In fact, depreciated by about 11% from 34.73 shillings to 34.73 shillings to 38.45 shillings. Okay, so that is a devaluation or a depreciation. But guess what happens this particular year? It actually dropped, both the currency and the exchange rate dropped in value by 6 and 5% respectively, and the loss on our books was 278 million shillings. Okay? So that is actually what happened to our book, and that's the loss that we actually booked in our particular book that you'll be able to see later. I've spent a little bit of time on this because there's been so much debate out there, especially on social media. You know, people trying to demonstrate how not very advanced in knowledge they are in trying to explain why NSSF made a loss. So as you can see, it ain't a loss, it is a notional loss, which has to be recognized in your P&L. And if you look at the example just of Safaricom, in the previous years, we've actually booked gains of 164 million shillings, 226 million shillings, 331 million shillings before registering a loss of 278 million shillings. So as you can see, we've actually been making money on these stocks, right? It's only that this year, unfortunately, the market turned against us. But it doesn't mean that the loss is realized because we still hold these stocks on our books. So a little bit of time on this, but I wanted to get everybody on board so that when you go out there, please explain to people that your fund still has the money and you are in very, very safe place. So let's make a little bit of progress on the financial performance. We describe our financial performance based on 4 areas. We start off with our customers. So we have a target to have a customer appreciation or a customer engagement score of 95%. That's our long-term objective. We've been hovering around the 85, 86. Last year it went down to 78%. This year it improved about 84%, which means that customers were more appreciative of our services. You will notice that if you were to draw a long-term graph, this number has remained sort of stagnant, and we've not pushed towards our target of 95%. The reason that has happened is largely because of product, okay? We don't offer sufficient product for our members. So everybody says, yeah, you give us a great service when we come to your branches. You know, we've got an electronic advice that tells me how much money I've got on my account. When I check my balances there, I got a couple of million shillings, but I'm in debt. I don't know what to do with my debt, and you know, I've got to wait until I'm 55. So please give me more product, all right? So that's the reason why people aren't really so happy with the service that we provide them. So we are giving them the sort of software service, but they would like the hardware. They would like us to give them something more fundamental, and that is to do with product. We believe that that's the problem that will be resolved by the NSSF Amendment Acts, and we are hopeful that when we do come back to you once the NSSF Amendment Act has been passed and we are able to provide our customers with more product, then hopefully that number will begin to tick up forward. But in the meantime, we'll continue to work on our strategy to make our customers' experience great. Today, 70% of our customers don't come to our branches. Only 30% come into our branches, and of those, the majority of them have been coming in to register. And as you'll see, we've already introduced self-registration. So the experience that they have in our branches is great. They love it. but they want us to provide them a little bit more, which is why they want up that score to 95%. The other area we look at is our financial position. We start off with our collections. I told you that because of the performance of the economy, companies are hiring more people. We've seen that growth. So last year we collected 1 trillion shillings. This year that went up by about 16, 17, 18% to 1.227 trillion shillings. If you combine that with the amounts of money that we invested in income, so the 3 lines demonstrate the income. You'll notice that there's been a sharp drop in the income, which I will explain a little bit later on, relating to the loss of 404 billion shillings out of our equity and foreign currency positions. You'll also notice that we've been able to pay off 447 or almost 450 billion shillings in benefits, and also our expenditure has been about 144 billion shillings away from 115 billion shillings. So if you combine those two, in other words, add the contributions, add the income, remove the benefits, remove the costs, because those are leaving your balance sheet, you'll notice that our balance sheet ended up at about 11.3 trillion shillings. And that was a growth of about 23, what's the growth rate in them? Let's just go back. The growth rate was about 16. So anyway, it grew by about 1.3 trillion shillings on the balance sheet side, bringing us the assets under management to about 11.3 trillion. It is slightly less than what it grew last year at about 1.3 trillion, but that is largely because of that 400 billion shillings that went out of the income relating to the values of our stocks. So we're still seeing good growth, and if you look at the 5-year average, we've been growing at about 23%, which is a reasonable growth in this market, given that the economy is growing at the rate of about 6%. So we are growing slightly, well, a lot higher than the economy. All right, so delivery of a service is our third number, or our third way we look at our performance. The first one is under service delivery, we improved on our registration. The impact of this means that we are now able to self-register both for the employer and the employee. In fact, we now can confirm to people that you don't need to come to our branches to register as a new member. You do not have to come to our branches to register as a new employer. You can do that on the comfort of your office or your desk or even your smartphone. The impact of this is that customers can register anywhere, anytime, anyhow, and the convenience to our staff, it means that now you can register within 30 seconds. It used to be about 10 minutes, now you can register within 30 seconds, and please try it. And we've saved a lot of paper because it used to be a paper process. Now we do not need to use paper to register people because it's all in the cloud. The second area we've been able to improve is on the benefits payout. You'll also notice that it has stagnated around 8 days. It goes up and down. Goes up normally when we have, today we are going to announce interest. I'm very sure everybody will come in to pick their money within the next couple of weeks. But once it irons out, we are around the 8th day. It's been a little bit tough bringing it below that, largely because of system, and we are in the process of putting there a new system, and we think that within the next 2 to 3 years, we should be able to hit our 1-day turnaround target on benefits. The third area is on value-added services. I think the big one that we've been able to do is today, if you put in your benefit, you should be able to track it and get a little message like that on your phone to basically tell you every single place where this benefit is, and therefore you should be able to track that process and actually, at least know where your staff is. So very, very good innovation that we are being that we're doing within the fund to be able to drive this fund to increase the customer experience. The last area is our staff. We measure our engagement with our staff every year, and you'll notice that that is one area where we've been performing very well. Again, we have a target of 95% engagement. We've been hovering around the 90% mark, and we are making a lot of progress to be the employer of choice in Uganda. I'd like to say that within the next 2 to 3 years, we should be the place to go to. If anybody wants a job, they will be coming to NSSF and wanting to work with us. Why are we doing this? Because our people are our biggest investment. They deliver for us. And just one little graph I'd like you to look at. It shows you the amount of money we invest in training per employee. In the year ending June 2017, we invested almost 5 million shillings. Today, at the end of this financial year, we're investing 7 million shillings per staff. What are we changing our staff into? The biggest role that used to be in the fund was customer service. Second was operations. And third was compliance. Okay? Today, we do not need any compliance officers because we've got a good relationship manager. We engage with our customers. So we are teaching our people financial literacy. We want our people to be our advocates out there, teaching everybody how to save and invest their money, not only in NSSF, but in other investment areas. Because that's the thing, that's the value we think we can add to our members. We do not want them to just think about NSSF. We want them to be able to put their money in other investment options so that when they retire, they've got more than one option, which is NSSF. The second thing we are teaching our people is automation, right? We are doing a lot of artificial intelligence. We are teaching our people to use a lot of machine learning. We are teaching our people to be able to provide services anywhere. All the apps that we're doing are all being developed in-house. And all these are being done by our people. We're training our people to become the future analysts of this country. And we believe that that is a good value because it's no longer the customer service because people won't come into our branches, all right? The people will not be able to come in to process benefits because there is straight through processing that is happening with the machines. So we are giving our staff more value to be able to give our customers more value. So I would like at this moment to really thank my colleagues for having embraced this. Of course, we introduced the creche recently to make our environment better for our members, for our staff. And it is the reason why we are doing very well. It's because of our staff. So everybody who is in here, who is our staff, congratulations, well done. Thank you so much for the support you give to the fund. And you're doing a great job, and that's why we have these great results. So let's look at the mission of the fund. The mission of the fund is definitely for our members. And what do we want to promise to our members? That every single time, whatever the environment, whatever it is, we will always make sure that their savings are protected. When they're given to us, we'll make sure that they get more than they've put in with us. And that inflation, which is an enemy of everybody who has money, does not affect their savings. That is our single-minded objective, to be able to prevent your savings from being eroded. So how are we doing this? We know that we set ourselves a target. Our target is 2 percentage points above 10-year moving inflation. And that is the hurdle, the benchmark that we always have to beat. We have to protect your savings. We've done that over the last 7 years. And we believe that this year, I'm not privileged to be able to make that announcement. But if you look at these graphs, we've done it before. The blue is the 10-year inflation. The orange, or whatever color you can read from that, is the minimum return. So it's 2 percentage points above minimum inflation. If you look at the year ending 15-16, we beat that by almost 3%. If you look at the following year, we beat that by almost 3% or 2%. And last year, obviously, was a record year. We beat that by almost 6%. So what will it be this year? What will it be this year? I don't know. Hopefully the minister will announce it, and hopefully we will still beat the minimum that we promised you. So, let's look at the financials. The Auditor General talked about the financials. These are the numbers he was talking about. And I know that a lot of people, some people do not like numbers. So now is the time for you to check your mobile phone and see the messages you've missed while you're concentrating on the presentation, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers. So let's start off with the financial position, the statement of income. Don't pay so much attention to it, because you might see some of the secrets of the numbers that we might be presenting soon. But I just wanted to show you that our interest income went up. That is the income we get from our investments in fixed income. So that's a big highlight, almost 20% went up. The number that I had alluded to earlier on, you'll notice that our dividends went up. That is the third line in the revenue number. You'll notice that it went up from 52% or 53%, 53 billion shillings, to 77 billion shillings, almost by 45%. That was the biggest growth line. So that demonstrates to you that although the companies are their valuations are going down because of the externalities, the companies are fundamentally, robust. They are resilient, and they are giving us very good dividends, right? And as you can see, the dividend number has really grown. So overall, our total income went up by 20%, driven by, as I said, dividend and also interest income. The bad news that I've been talking about, or have been alluding to, that I've been talking about much of last week and much of this week, is the fair value loss on investments at fair values through the profit and loss. So that is the movement between our stocks, which show that last year we had recognized a profit or a gain on those values of 212 billion shillings. That figure went down to 0 and then minus 206 billion shillings. The other loss that was recorded was on foreign exchange, which, as I explained, so that's the component. Again, last year, because the shilling had depreciated against other currencies, we had made a gain of 319 billion shillings. This year, because of the reverse action of the currency, the values lost 247 billion shillings. There was some increase in other operating income, a small amount, but overall, if you look at that income line, you'll notice that that number went down by 440 billion shillings. And as I told you many times before, it is a book transaction. It doesn't represent a loss because we haven't sold off those positions. Our expenditure lines largely remained in check. However, I'd like to point out that we have a new line in there, which the Auditor General talked about, which is the treatment of IFRS 9 provision, which is basically a requirement this time to recognize losses on your portfolio. And for us, because most of our investments are in treasury bonds, the expected losses are very minimal. A lot of these losses relate to our trade receivables. So it's the business that we do where we're expecting people to pay us things like rent, things like the other businesses where we give a service and we haven't been paid. So that's where we've been able to recognize those loss provisions. And that figure, as you'll notice, is about 5 billion shillings. If you are a keen reader of the financial statements, as you should be, you'll also notice that that was the amount we put into our current P&L. We did have a few adjustments in the previous retentions of another 5 billion shillings, because the total amount, is, because we started recognizing this standard this year, was about 10 billion shillings. Okay. So I would like to jump away from that, because if I go below that, I might disclose the interest that we're going to pay, so I will not do that. So if you haven't seen it, you haven't seen it. So let's look at our balance sheet. Our balance sheet also grew quite nicely. As I said, the key movements were around deposits in commercial banks. Although it shows a movement in growth, it actually isn't, because if you look at the timing difference, we normally don't invest in banks. We normally put money in banks in order to wait for major auctions on the treasury bond. So you will notice that although it does show that there was an increase in our deposits with commercial banks, it actually isn't, because that money moved out and went into treasury bonds. So the biggest growth you'll notice was around the debt instruments at amortization cost. In the past, they used to call them investments in securities held to maturity, but the standard has now changed. I think it's standard 15, which has changed, and now we call them debt instruments at amortization of cost, and that's because we don't mark them to market, because we hold them up till maturity. So that means that if we were marking them to market, by the way, would have registered some gains, but because we've got to hold them until maturity, we amortize them until the time they become mature, and therefore we leave them on our balance sheet. But you notice that that's where the biggest increase was. So if you look at the model that I shared with you at the very beginning of the presentation, I told you that our fixed income had grown from about 70% to about 79%. That's the growth that's being reflected in there, because that relates to those bonds. The next area of significant movement was the equity investments at fair value. You notice a slight drop. As I say, that slight drop relates to the revaluation losses that I talked about earlier on. The other growth was obviously on the fund itself. Our fund, or our member fund, grew from 9.4 trillion shillings, to 11 trillion shillings. So that's the growth that represents what members are actually holding in their accounts as at the end of the financial year. Coming to the end of this. So, what does the future look like for us? You're welcome, Honorable Minister. So, Honorable Minister, we are talking about the future. The future for the fund is bright. The future is great. We think that the future will revolve around innovation. We already are doing fantastic things at the fund. And we think that if we do not innovate, we won't be able to see tomorrow. So the biggest question that we get asked is, I have a lot of money saved at NSSF. It is useless for me until I retire. How can we become relevant to this member? You remember I told you that one of our biggest challenges has been that we have not been able to improve our customer score, our customer appreciation score, from around 80% to our target of 95%. That's because of product. So there are two things that will impact the future. We believe that the first one will be the Act, right? The Amendment Act, Honorable Minister, just in time. We think that if we get the amended Act done, we should be able to sort out a lot of the problems our customers have. The second thing that we believe will help us is our innovation program. We launched our innovation program in November of last year, and we are doing great things with them. So, what are the things that the Act will help us with? One, it will help us in improving coverage. Okay? So, the clauses in there are, we shall be able to include the informal sector. So the people in the informal sector, people who do not work for a business, not working formally, will be able to register with NSSF and begin to contribute voluntarily, and that should enable people who are currently not covered in NSSF to be able to be covered by NSSF. So that's the first part of coverage. The second part of coverage is the requirement that the clause within the Act that changes the companies that will now be able to contribute we remove from the 5% mark, 5% employees to 1 employee. So we think that those 2 clauses within the Act will improve coverage and will enable us to give Social Security to the majority of people who are not currently covered. The second area is adequacy. What is it about adequacy? The first thing about adequacy is that today the average amount of money that people save is 15 million shillings. I think I've mentioned this so many times. The number has been going up, but has not been going up so much. The reason is that obviously people still get low salaries, and for a long time the fund was not giving them a good return. So over the last 10 years, we've been giving a double-digit, or actually 7 years, we've been giving a double-digit interest rate. And that means that the fund has been growing quite astronomically. But in the past, because a lot of the people who were contributing, the monies were not being invested properly, so the returns are not big, and therefore the amounts of money they get out of there. So one of the things that the Act is going to do is going to give us more leverage in terms of how we can invest, improve the governance, and also making sure that the money that comes in, we can continue to give you the double-digit growth that we've been giving. But the second most important thing about adequacy is the fact that you will be able to, if the tax proposals are implemented, you will be able to save more. So instead of saving just 15%, you'll be able to save up to 30% of your income, tax-free. And if you wait until you're age 60, then you don't have to pay any tax on the money that you would have saved with the NSSF. The number I've been sharing with our members is that currently, if you were to save $1 million, if you're on a salary of $1 million, interest, you'll be able to have on your account 300 million shillings. However, if you were to pay the money in tax-free and also wait until the age of 50 so that you're not taxed, that figure would increase to 450 million shillings. Okay? So your amount of savings at the very end of 60 years would be adequate to cover you for the rest of your retirement period. So we believe that if those proposals within the law are passed in their current form, then the issue of adequacy will be sorted out. And finally, the issue of relevance, especially to midterm access, will also be fulfilled. That is what our members are telling us. Our members are telling us, yes, we can wait for a pension for midterm access, especially for members who provide voluntary contributions. We've talked about all the options. Is it 50% of the amount given to a bank as security or collateral, or is it a 20% withdrawal of a cash in order to get a house? Whatever the combination is, through our actuarial evaluation, we should be able to find a product that will be acceptable to our members for them to be able to get midterm access, because we believe that's a great demand. Having said that, it's important to note that we also need to go back and say, is 15% enough for you to be able to get that midterm access? And that's something that we can debate a little bit earlier on. But the future definitely means that the Act needs to change so that we are able to have a little bit of flexibility so that we can innovate for our members. So talking about innovation, we've already been able to launch our innovation agenda to be able to sustain ourselves for the future. We call it the High Innovator. The fund's program was launched in November of last year. It's in 2 bits. One is the internal innovation, where we use that for coming up with new members and services for our members. The second one is the external innovation, which is in supporting economic development. That means that we shall be able to help businesses that want to scale, that are able to increase their employment, that are able to contribute more for the NSSF and also tax, and also to provide social security within those businesses. So we think that our external innovation will be able to generate through bringing up small businesses, innovative businesses, high-tech businesses, helping them to come to market with their ideas so that they can able to to give back to a very good society of Uganda. So we believe that the innovative program will definitely help us both on the internal side and also on the external side to be able to spur more development and innovation for the fund. On those very few words, I would like to thank you and wish you a great meeting.
Thank you very much, Richard. Another round of applause for Richard. Thank you. Once again, let me take this opportunity to recognize the presence in our midst of the Minister of Finance, Honorable Matia Kasaija. You're most welcome, Honorable. NSSF presentations are always presentations of trillions and billions. We used to joke in the newsroom with my colleagues. Big numbers. I mean, just imagine, over 1 trillion shillings in collections in 1 year. And over 100 billions in collections in just 1 month. Because that's the average number when you look at the numbers given to us by Richard. I always ask myself, what more can the fund do to drive and support long-term investments in this market? Because anyone who has gone into that space will tell you one of the challenges is the cost of money. And with such numbers, of course, the fund will do a lot in supporting that area. But we are going to have a panel discussion, and I'm sure some of those questions will be put to the fore and see what is in stock. Richard talked about the products and the innovations that are coming. Probably it's one of the things that is under consideration. At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me invite the chairman, NSSF board, to come and kindly make his presentation, but also he will do the noble job of helping us invite our guest of honor, the Minister of Finance, after the presentation. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the chairman as he comes up.
I have not brought a glass of water like Richard did. That means I'm going to be relatively short. Not the 1 hour we've just had, but we felt it was important for you to get that foundational information before I give you a high view of our board thinking. Honorable Minister, sir, you are very much welcome to this 7th annual members meeting. We missed you last year, but you were ably represented. To follow the protocol, let me recognize a few of us. The Auditor General, my senior colleague in the accountancy profession, together with your senior staff, Mr. Joseph Hiria, the Ernest and Young country partner, lead partner, Mr. Geoffrey Yamugisha, who was in the kitchen with our numbers for 2018-2019. Our regulator, represented by the CEO himself, Mr. Martin Insubuga, you will give our greetings to Mr. Kasiria, the chairman, and invite him at least to attend the next members meeting next year. I didn't see him last year, but I know it doesn't mean that he doesn't take us seriously. I want to recognize my colleagues of the 11th board. Honorable Minister, the 10th board term of office ended last year on 31st of August 2018, and with all expeditious action, you were able to put in place the 11th board for a 3-year term, which started on 1st of September 2018. We want to thank you so much for that decisiveness and to ensure continuity of fund business. And I have a few friends here from the 11th board. Others are busy with other country duties. But those whom I have seen, you will excuse me in case I haven't seen you yet, but those who have these booklets, please look on page 4. There is a pictorial presentation of the 11th board, and we start counting these numbers from Honorable Minister from 1986, when the NRM government started leading this country. So present here we have Madame Florence Namata Maweje. She represents employers, and she's a senior official with the Centenary Bank. We also have Mr. Fred Bamwesije. By the way, Florence was on the 10th board, so she's really continuing with our good leadership. And she chairs the staff matters. Thank you, Florence. Next is Mr. Fred Bamwesije. He's the Deputy Managing Director of the Uganda Civil Aviation Authority. He also represents employers. If we go by the pictures, we have Madame Penina Tukamwesiga. She's a lawyer and member of COFTU, representing workers. She was on the 10th board, continues on the 11th board. If I go by the pictures on the lower side, we have Dr. Isaac Amagola. He's the head of department at MOBS and represents COFTU, also the workers team. Next there, I think in absentia, Mr. Peter Werike from NOTU is not with us, but he reported for work. Mr. Stephen Mgole also comes, he represents the workers from NOTU. He's a new member on the board. Not in the picture here is Mr. Pius Bigirimana, who was on the 11th board up to about 2 months ago. He joined the Ministry of Justice, but he did work with us for, I can say, the last 1 year. And we can thank him in absentia. As you've just been listening to the big man around here, big picture, on the next page, page number 5 there, the managing director, Mr. Richard Vyarugaba, is our also, he represents the executive committee on the board of directors, and the last but not least is myself as chairperson. Mr. Minister, I've been given 3 pages here, and I will read them in 4 parts. One part will be to will be a word of welcome and a general remark. Other people call it preamble. The other second part of my remarks will be giving you a strategic outlook of the fund, what we are doing, what we would like to do, perhaps what the MD was talking about, the future, or how we envisage and envision the fund's future performance. But members, where I would ask you to give me the biggest attention will be my remarks on the NSSF Act. My remarks on the NSSF Act is the big thing. It is going to have a lot of impact on the operational performance and efficiency of the fund, perhaps for the next 30, 50 years, when you and me may not be around within the fund. The current act we are using was 1985. That's when it was legislated. That is 34, 35 years ago. And it has brought us to this level. The people who drafted that act had strong views. We want to appreciate them in absentia. Some of them are not alive. But times have moved on. And the way we do business, nationally, regionally, globally, has continued to evolve. And we need to notice this. This is a big opportunity, and we must use it very well. So, if you are coming to listen to what the chairman might say, don't think very much about interest rate. Interest rate is what we call short-term business for the next 12 months. This act is going to be important for this country for the next 40, 50 years. So it is the big do. And I think last year I was saying the big do was pension towers. We really wanted it constructed last year. That was the big thing. I haven't put it aside. I'll make some small remark about it as well. But the most important thing for us to think about, to reflect about, to consult about within the next 1 month or 2 is the NSSF Act. So that will be my section 3. And finally, in my 3-page speech, as you can see, I have not brought the lovely slides which the MD brought about, this was deliberate to ask you to listen attentively. So D will be really a small remark to conclude my remarks and to invite the Honorable Minister to give his remarks to this audience. We've not had much time to chat about some of these things with the Minister. The Minister has been busy in his office, budget planning for next year. He has been called in the local area in Bunyoro. You know, he's the lead politician of the area. There have been campaigns that side, so he had to attend to them as well. But I would ask for his indulgence. He might ask me, why do you say those things in public? Couldn't you come in our office? We finish all that discussion between us two. But some of these things need a bigger audience. So, to start my speech, those were preliminaries. So, Honorable Minister, Sir, Auditor General, Honorable Members of Parliament present, Mr. Richard Byarugaba, the Managing Director, NSSF, Mr. Patrick Ayota, the Deputy Managing Director, NSSF. I've seen some CEOs here present who are our major I don't want to say customers, maybe, but we deal with these employment organizations and leaderships in order to collect the members' funds. So it is important they come and get the feel, and we also want to hear what they might have to say. Members or servers or other organizations, the countries call them participants of the scheme in NSSF. Members of the press, I always love members of the press because they have really partnered with us to carry out our message very well. So members of the press, thank you for the work you are doing out there. People talk of literacy. Financial literacy, socio-economic literacy, all those things. You've done this job wonderfully well. Distinguished guests and the other Ugandans, both in Uganda here, or in the room here, and those viewing us, and even those in the diaspora. I want to reassure our members that the fund is on a growth trajectory. The MD really explained this, but those of you again who have this little booklet, if you looked at your page number 8, if you looked at your page number 8 and you see those graphs there and pictorials and histograms, all of them are growing up and up and up and up, except one, which is on the lower side of the page on the lower left. All of the others are really growing. That shows you the fundamentals of the fund are still strong. The systems, the processes, the people, the vision, the mission, still strong. The leadership, but that other lower left tells you that if you invest in equities or in shares, and most of them are listed on the stock exchanges of the region, the share price, because of sentiment, whether internal or external, can go up and down. For the last several years, we have been getting the gain side, and we almost took it for granted. But this is to remind us that shares can come down. But also shares in our investment portfolio are one of the best areas to invest in. And we are not scared, we are not moving out, we are not selling our shares in many of these places because the share price has temporarily gone down. When we do the fundamental analysis and technical analysis, we find that they are likely to go up again. So I want to tell those who might not be maybe financially sophisticated that 5 out of the 6 pictures show strength of the fund. One reminds us about the vulnerability in any business. But the fund leadership will continue to do what it can, whatever it takes to ensure we stop our losses where necessary or grow for the better where possible. So I just wanted to give you that assurance that your fund is still on a good course. The MD has already told you our size, financial position, other people call it balance sheet or net assets, whatever you might call it. We were 9 or nearly 10 trillion last year. Now we are 11 trillion. We are growing. That is the message you should take home. The fund is stable and growing. And I want to thank the board members, staff, and management who have ensured that this happens. And the staff out there who are still in the offices and in the branches and in the field, I want to thank them and want to say continue with that zeal. We have a good cause to fight for, to ensure good social security, relative social security for those who are serving with us. I was reading the paper this morning. Somebody is saying we are not in social security, but I think that one is for another day. But we are in the business of touching a small part of social security. What is social security? It means we are trying to reduce vulnerabilities, ours mainly when you have grown old. But also members have been telling us they also get anxieties, problems when they are even not yet retired. Although that you are supposed to do that through your employer and other businesses you might be doing. But people are saying, please also think about us. We fall sick. We have children at times who are about to finish and they want to send them out of school. Somebody has brought a child up to third year of university, private sponsorship, and they need 2 million shillings for the last semester. And the parent is really fixed. and the parent might have 80 million saved with the NSSF. Somebody says, can you help me with this 1.8 million shillings top up so that, and we flash this parent, the law cannot help us. We can't help you, though we are keeping your 80 million. I think the law should reflect the pains and aspirations of the population. So we need to review this. I know we might have imported some of these things from our places we studied and the other countries we have visited, but we need to know our context. So we need to review social security and see where we can intervene apart from the end retirement thing. But if somebody is having challenges when the house is falling and he just needs some 3 million for repairs here and there, and he has 100 million with NSSF, I think really there is something missing which we should address. The board remains committed to promoting good corporate governance. Many entities succeed or fail, Honorable Minister, because of corporate governance. So when you hear the members crying out there about good leadership, it is because they are worried. They have given almost all their life expectation with us, and because of bad leadership, somebody can just destroy that value. So NSSF in the past, many years, got challenged in this area of corporate governance. And we must continue to correct this picture. Honorable Minister, I want to thank you for your leadership. You have been sensitive to what is happening at the fund, and I can assure you during your tenure there has been a remarkable stability within the fund, and this should continue. So we are happy about this alignment between your office as a supervising minister, representing government, and the board, and the top management of NSSF, and the staff who implement all these policies and the directives that we give them. We are thankful, and we hope some proposals about corporate governance, enhancement of corporate governance at NSSF will be addressed in the NSSF Act amendment proposals. The interest, I keep meeting members there who have money saved with the fund, and when we talk of members meeting the AGM or AMM, annual members meeting, they talk of interest. But as I've said, interest is good, it should be there, but annual members meeting is an opportunity for you to give more wide-ranging issues about what is happening at your fund. And I will not be very selfish not to make a small comment, since many people are thinking about that interest thing. I want to make a small comment about it. And I want to say, I hope, Honorable Minister, you will declare a reasonable interest figure within the context. Within the context. Because we as board, our main fundamental thinking and what keeps us awake at night is to ensure we maintain your savings, the capital you've saved with us, capital preservation. And if there was no inflation, that would be enough for us. But because there is inflation, we said, look, it should be preserved, but also not be eroded by inflation. So whatever is kept with us should be generated annually just to ensure